Roland Martin Unfiltered on the Black Star Network. I didn't know this, and y'all know how I love history, but the first paramedics in the United States, African American, yes, founded in 1967 in Pittsburgh, the predominantly Black Hill District there in Pittsburgh. Kevin Hazard has a new book called American Sirens, and he lays out how this started and pays tribute to these unsung heroes and the challenges that they face, including systemic racism and institutional adversity. Kevin, there's so many stories. I mean, my God, we could just go on and on and on of amazing things African Americans have done that have not gotten credit, that people don't mention. And this historical reality that the first paramedics were Black, a lot of people had never heard of this until that excerpt from the Max series, The Pit, talked about it. This is just unbelievable. When did you first find out about this incredible story?
Summer of 2018. I'd spent a decade as a paramedic in Atlanta, and I wrote a memoir about that experience. And someone who read it reached out to me and said, "Hey, I read your book. Have you ever heard this other story? Do you know how it all began?" And I had not. So I started researching Freedom House, because those are two words that I had never heard before. And I didn't know what it was. And immediately what I realized was that Freedom House was where all of this began. So, like I said, I spent a decade as a paramedic. It was a formative 10 years of my life. And I thought I understood the history. I thought I understood the science and the culture of it. Beginning to research this, I realized I didn't. And then even more so, I realized nobody did, that there was no definitive account of how in 1966, a doctor looked around and said, "My God, there are thousands of people dying for lack of a very simple but advanced new branch of emergency medicine. And if nobody else is going to create it, I'm going to create it." And then, to top that off, he can't get anybody to fund it. He certainly can't get anybody to join it. And, he happened to be living in Pittsburgh at the time. And there just so happened to be a nonprofit in the city of Pittsburgh based in the Hill District, which, is a predominantly Black neighborhood in the city. And what they were trying to do was bring job opportunities to local residents. They were having an incredibly difficult time doing it. And so they walked into the hospital one day with a very, basic plan to say, "Hey, what if we can bring our residents to the hospital? Is there a way we can sort of create this very low tech ambulance service?" And the doctor, Peter Saffer, looks across at Jim McCoy, who was running Freedom House Ambulance, and he said, "No, we are not going to do a low tech ambulance service. We're going to change the world." And through the course of that meeting, two things come out. One is that the world's first paramedics are going to be from the city of Pittsburgh. And the second is that the world's first paramedics are going to be Black men from the Hill District.
Okay, so prior to this, what happened? Either you drove yourself to the hospital, or you were screwed, or someone came to the house?
Yeah, 100%. It depended on where you live. There are some cities where it might be a volunteer fire department. There's some places where it was a funeral home, which, if you think about it, makes sense. It's the only business with a vehicle that can transport a person who's lying down. But what a horrible start to your emergency. You're hoping that your family member doesn't die, and what screeches up in front is a hearse. And two undertakers hop out and have to sweep flower petals out of the back of the hearse. And then load your family member in and race them to the hospital. They're going to get paid about $2,000 for the funeral, maybe $20 for the ambulance ride, so you can see, where their loyalties really lied. I mean, it was a horrible situation, and a lot of people were dying because nobody who showed up had any kind of training. In the city of Pittsburgh, what you had was a police-borne ambulance service, so it was usually older cops who drove around an old beat-up paddy wagon. It had a canvas stretcher. They had no equipment. They had no training. They had no ability to do anything but take you to the hospital. In fact, they didn't even ride with you. But you got a ride, depending on who you were. In the Hill District, which again, low income, high crime, vast majority of the people living there were black. And the reason that neighborhood was the way it was because the city had routinely sort of chipped away at its infrastructure, had denied it funding, because of redlining in real estate laws, people living there were not allowed to move out into other areas. So it just got continually cramped. So if the cops got a call in that area, they might show up, they might not. When they did show up, they might transport you and they might not. One of the future paramedics has, an incredible story of his mother having a stroke, and he called for help. And, this paddy wagon pulls up, 2 aging cops amble out. They slowly make their way inside. They take one look at his mother, who has never had a drink in her life, and said, she's drunk. He knew his mother was having a stroke. He fought with them. He argued, finally convinced them to take her to the hospital, but they refused to carry her. So he had to carry his own mother to the back of this paddy wagon. He laid her in. They shut the doors and drove away. His mother rode in the back alone to the hospital, where she later died of a stroke. So this was a sort of care that existed around the country. In 1965, a report was released that said you are more likely to survive a gunshot wound in Vietnam than you were in the U.S. And the reason was that in Vietnam, you have a corpsman. In the U.S., you have the volunteer fire department, you have the funeral home, or you have 2 indifferent police officers who show up to your house at a paddy wagon, none of whom are trained. And that's what existed prior to Freedom House.
So these young men who started Freedom House, what was their prior experience? Were they healthcare practitioners? Were they in the military? I mean, how did this even just come up to create this?
So 2 things happened simultaneously. One is Peter Safar, who is the doctor who invented CPR. His own daughter died of an asthma attack because the people who showed up to her emergency were not able to treat her. So by the time she got to the hospital, she was dead. He took that experience and turned it into action. And so he spent about a year, developed what would become the first paramedic curriculum. So that happens. So you have this incredibly, advanced training program. They're able, anyone who went through his program would be able to do essentially what a paramedic does today. But he didn't have the people. And so, the guys who eventually were recruited for this, I mean, you think about the sales pitch for a second. This is an 8, maybe 9-month training course, 5 days a week, occasionally on the weekends, oftentimes at night. You've got to walk away from your life to do this. So this isn't, people who say yes to this aren't people with a lot of options, especially when you consider that when you finish this course, you've been trained for a job that technically does not exist. So what are you even going to do when you come out of this? So the guys that he and Jim McCoy recruited, some of them were military veterans, some of them were high school dropouts, some were just high school graduates, a few had criminal records. A bunch of them, though, the majority of them were just young guys who the world had said, you don't really have a place. And they were looking to find a way to make their mark. And it just so happened that the place they were going to make their mark was in the back of an ambulance.
So, these 2 docs. So, were there 1 or 2 doctors? Is it Safar and someone else?
Yeah, Safar was the doctor, and then McCoy was the man who ran the nonprofit that recruited the people. Gotcha.
And explain this. Explain this situation with this former governor of Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
and the former mayor of Pittsburgh. Because it's just interesting how all of these different things intersect that leads to this incredible story.
So, as is the case today, first responders are the last ones to get any sort of government funding. So, when Safar comes up with this idea, his daughter died in 1966, in June of 1966. And so he immediately begins designing this idea for a paramedic force. Nobody in the city wants to pay for it. They don't think they need it. They don't think they want to pay for it. It's not something that anybody has any interest in. So jump forward to November of that year. Is a tightly contested gubernatorial race in the state of Pennsylvania. In the run-up to the final days of the election, a huge Democratic rally is planned for downtown. The keynote speaker is going to be a former mayor of Pittsburgh, former governor of Pennsylvania by the name of David Lawrence. He gets in front of the crowd. He gets about 2 words into his speech, and he topples over with a heart attack, drops to the floor, not breathing, no heartbeat. So panic breaks out among the crowd, and somebody in the room calls for help. Now, there happened to be a nurse in the room named Karen McGuire, and she runs forward. She pushes people out of the way. She checks for a pulse, doesn't find one, checks for breathing. He's not breathing, and she begins CPR. So as this guy hits the ground, he has advanced care immediately taking place at his side, which is the best case scenario. Within a few minutes, the police-borne ambulance service arrives. And again, it's 2 cops. They have a canvas stretcher. They had a bottle of oxygen that was either empty or broken. Accounts differ, but either way, it was completely useless. They push Nurse McGuire out of the way. So they immediately stop care. They pick up Lawrence, who was a large man. They pick him up. They put him on the canvas stretcher. And they start struggling through the crowd to get him out of there. Karen sees this and realizes these guys aren't going to do anything. So she runs to keep up with them. She catches him outside, sees them putting him in the back of this paddy wagon alone. So she jumps in at the last second, tries to resume CPR, but they're speeding through the streets. So she's just thrown around in the back of this truck. It's nothing done. A few minutes later, they pull up to the hospital, and who's the doctor there to meet them but Peter Safar, the guy who invented CPR and the guy who has been harassing the city for months to start a paramedic corps. He meets David Lawrence, who is the city's most famous citizen, and he sees that he is dead, despite the fact that the moment he needed care, he had it. When the city's version of care arrived, he lost it. And because of that, he was brain dead when he arrived at the hospital. This provides the catalyst that gets the city to finally say yes. It's so often the case. It doesn't matter that a child died of an asthma attack. It doesn't matter that Mitch Brown's mother died of a stroke because the cops refused to help her. What mattered was that a very famous man died, and the city saw for itself. Thousands of people witnessed it firsthand, but it was covered heavily in the newspapers and on TV. Everybody knew that David Lawrence died because the city was lacking in its healthcare infrastructure. So finally, they turned to Safar and they said, fine, if you want to do this thing, go ahead and do it.
Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase. Listen to what I'm about to tell you. The window to invest in Fanbase is closing. We've raised over $10.6 million of our $17 million goal. That means there's room for less than 6,370 people to invest in Fanbase for the average amount. The minimum to invest in Fanbase right now is $399. That makes you an owner in Fanbase today. Go to startengine.com/fanbase to invest. Why? Because current social apps have taken advantage of users for far too long, with content suppression, shadow banning, harmful racist content, and no real tools for monetization and equity. Fanbase has over 1.4 million users and counting, allowing anyone to reach all their following and monetize their content from day one. Social media is the new TV, and whoever owns the apps that distribute that content have the opportunity to own potential billion-dollar companies. While big platforms with uncertain futures are failing to serve their users, Fanbase is stepping up to fill the gap. Don't wait until it's too late. Invest now, invest for yourself and your future. Go to startengine.com/fanbase and own the next generation of social media.
There were no paramedics anywhere else in the country, right?
No, nothing like this exists anywhere in the country. And again, 1965, a group of physicians put out this pamphlet decrying how bad pre-hospital care is in the United States. Vietnam is going on, so you have physicians who are returning home and who have experience with corpsmen who are saying, this is doable. Somebody could do this. We could train people to save lives. 1965 alone, more Americans die in auto accidents and were killed in the entirety of the Korean War. This is avoidable traumatic deaths is an epidemic in the mid-1960s in America. So people wanted change, but it wasn't happening. And, here is Peter Safar, this incredibly driven, incredibly bright guy who, is living off of a horrible bit of tragedy and is helped along by a very public and preventable death.
So what's interesting here is that, we hear a lot about, the war on poverty. This is one of the great success stories of the war on poverty. And if you listen to conservatives, you think that the war on poverty was a total abject failure. No. This is, you're right. I mean, this is the perfect example of, a program that was set up. It had private funding, it had public funding, and it was set up specifically in a neighborhood that, so in the early 1950s, U.S. government is worried about the state of inner city America because, there's a lot of crumbling infrastructure, there's people moving out, and they're afraid that this is going to be a hotbed for communist infiltration. And so they come up with the urban renewal program, which is if you fix your blighted areas and you put in highways and hospitals and theaters and universities, we'll help you pay for that. So cities begin tearing down neighborhoods. And of course, what are you going to tear down? You're going to tear down the lowest income. You're going to tear down, the poorest area, the most beaten up area, the area with no ability to say, hey, hold on, what about us? So in the city of Pittsburgh, that was the Hill District, which up until that point, had been known as the Harlem of the Midwest. It was a neighborhood known for its famous jazz clubs. Lena Horne, Louis Armstrong routinely went there. It had 2 Negro League baseball teams. Satchel Paige was a pitcher on one of these. It had the nation's largest black-owned newspaper, the Pittsburgh Courier, very famous newspaper. It covered all the, the early civil rights stuff that Thurgood Marshall was involved in. It was a well-known historic area, and then the city decides, well, we want to build a highway and we want to build a civic center, and so they tear down 2/3 of the neighborhood. And again, because black residents were not allowed to buy houses in white neighborhoods, the people living there were stuck. So overnight, tens of thousands of people are disenfranchised, so they're all just pushed into the remaining 1/3 of that neighborhood. So immediately by the early to mid 1960s. Jobs are down, income's down, hope is down, which of course means that crime and drugs go up. And that's what the Hill District was facing when James McCoy, who was a civil rights activist, started Freedom House. He was trying to find a jobs program for people he knew were worth more than the outside world thought of them as. And but what was crazy though is Freedom House wasn't doing medical services. I love what you say here. It says, Freedom House was the brainchild of McCoy. Let me go ahead and say, as you write, a Houston native. Brainchild of McCoy, a civil rights activist with a long-term goal of fostering black-owned businesses. In the meantime, to build capital as the organization got on its feet, Freedom House was selling produce in the street in the back of a truck. And it was this truck that grabbed Hallen's attention. If you could move produce, then you could probably also move people. At least that's how Hallen saw it. Oh, they're moving produce. They can move people. That is crazy.
It's nuts. It's nuts. So Phil Hallen, he runs this nonprofit funder. So they're just a philanthropy that's focused specifically on medicine and areas where the healthcare system has been depleted through racism. Hallen had a history with EMS. He had a job when he was getting his PhD. He was working at a hospital. He would carry severed limbs from the OR down to the incinerator. He worked part-time on an ambulance. So he had some sense of what it was. He moves to Pittsburgh, and he knows that the EMS service in the U.S. is bad. And he sees it's particularly bad in Pittsburgh, especially bad in the Hill. And so he's looking for a way to fix this. And like you said, he's reading the newspaper one day, and he sees an article about Freedom House delivering produce around its neighborhood. August Wilson, he wrote that play Jitney based on, a group of people who couldn't get a cab. And so had this sort of makeshift cab system. They couldn't get any sort of help in the city. And Phil Hallen knew this. And of course, Jim McCoy knew this. And that's why McCoy had set up the produce thing. And so Hallen sees it and says, well, man, if you can move a tomato, you can move a person. Let's figure out a way to do this. And that's what brings the two of them to Presbyterian University Hospital, where they meet Peter Saffer, who's trying desperately to get an ambulance system off the ground, but doesn't have any people willing to take that risk.
Right. So Helen wants to do this here, but McCoy is looking for job opportunities for African Americans, and then those two forces merge. So this was a jobs program. I mean, I guess if Phil Hallen had some other kind of idea, that's what this would have turned out into. But so this didn't start off as from a McCoy. Well, hey, let's create this healthcare deal. It started off as a jobs opportunity, and then those two combined forces, and then that's what we get. 100%.
I mean, McCoy, he looked at this much more than, nobody knew, the word paramedic didn't exist. So nobody understood, sort of Saffer's genius. McCoy was saying, hey, if we start an ambulance service, we're going to have trucks, which means you're going to need drivers, which means you're going to need mechanics. There's probably going to be some sort of dispatch system. So we're going to have to hire dispatchers. In his mind, he's hearing jobs. He's hearing, mechanic jobs. He's hearing driver jobs, dispatcher jobs, careers. What he had been offered before this came along was housekeeper, gardener. Those aren't careers. Those are things that you're stuck into. He wanted a way to elevate the people in his neighborhood. The newspapers referred to people in the Hill as unemployables, which that means you don't have a job. That means you are not capable of gaining and holding a job. He didn't believe that. Nobody in the neighborhood believed that. And so they were looking for the opportunity. McCoy 100% sees this as a way to employ a lot of people.
So what's interesting to me is that this didn't start in white Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
That it start. I mean, that's still what strikes me. And so was Hallen specifically looking at this as an opportunity to provide jobs for African Americans, or was that just happenstance?
No, the jobs very specifically were for African Americans. What everybody assumed. So
Hallen's like, yo, we need this service.
Yep.
We need this service. And here's an opportunity to provide some jobs and economic opportunities for African Americans. Let's go.
100%. That's what they thought. But the presumption was like, this is going to be self-evident. The moment somebody sees your emergency responded to by a trained professional who can save your life on the spot, who doesn't have to wait until you get there to the hospital, that the whole world was going to embrace this, which is what happened in every city in America except for the one where it started. And the only difference is, of course, the one where it started, it was staffed entirely by young black men as opposed to young white men, which is how it was in other areas. So they thought.
Go ahead.
They thought it was going to expand. They thought like it would move to other neighborhoods in the city, that it would start in the Hill, but that it would move to everywhere in Pittsburgh because people would see the genius of it.
But it didn't.
It didn't.
And was it because they saw it was all black?
They will tell you, if you listen to some of the early meetings, the pushback was supposedly, well, we don't know if this works. We don't know if we can pay for this. We don't know if technically this is even legal to provide medicine outside of the hospital. There were all kinds of concerns. But again, the only place those concerns existed was the one place where the people providing the care were black. So they start in the Hill, and the one neighborhood that they expand to is downtown. Downtown has people of all stripes. So, these guys begin responding to calls, chest pain, shortness of breath, all the things that happen today. But some of the people now that they respond to are white. And for the first time, they find that their patients are actually weighing the option of, hey, do I want to die right here at my desk, or do I want to allow a black man to lay his hands on me?
Seriously?
Yeah, that was a real concern, and they had multiple occasions. They had to sit down and say, "Hey,
touch me, or I could die."
Yeah.
Let me just go ahead and go meet Jesus or go meet Satan.
Yeah, you're talking about a neighborhood or a city. People often think, when you think racism, you think segregation, you think Mississippi, you think Alabama. There were articles in the newspaper at the time when they began of white families who disliked their white neighbors and would intentionally sell their house to a black family. just to spite their neighbors. So if you're going to spite sell a house, if you think it's so odious to live next door to a minority couple that you are going to sell your house to one to tick off your neighbors, imagine then that is the person who walks through the door to unbutton your wife's blouse, to put electrodes on her chest. People really, really fought it. And these guys were stunned. These were young men who were used to having to explain, why are you doing what you're doing? Why aren't you just racing to the hospital? Why are you here messing around with my brother? Shouldn't you be gone already? They were used to having to explain, hey, we are paramedics. We are actually delivering care right here. What they were not used to have to explaining was, why us? Why are we the ones doing it? And are you sure that you really have to touch me?
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
An angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol.
We're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, Dave.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear. We still have examples of racist white folks who go into hospitals, and if it's a black doctor, they'll request somebody else, or say, don't you dare touch me. And it's like, okay, fine, you go right ahead and die then.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real pathology.
Absolutely. Freedom House lasts for how long in Pittsburgh?
They began school in 1967. They worked for the first time in 1968. In fact, the first time paramedic ever took the streets anywhere in the world was in the immediate aftermath of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. In April of 1968. They were shut down in October of 1975.
And were they shut down because of citywide adoption, and they wanted a more rigorous program? Why did it shut down?
There was no more rigorous program. In 1975, President Gerald Ford realized that paramedics, based on what was happening in Pittsburgh, paramedics had taken off all across the country, and they had uneven training, uneven equipment, and uneven deployment. And so he said, we need to create a national standard. Freedom House was chosen to serve as a national standard. Their medical director, a doctor by the name of Nancy Caroline, wrote a textbook based on her work there. And that textbook is used to this day to train people all over the world. If you say emergency care in the streets to a pre-hospital provider, they will get misty-eyed. Everybody knows that book. Everybody knows Nancy Caroline. She took what she learned in Pittsburgh, she brought it to Israel and created their national healthcare program. This was as advanced an EMS program as existed anywhere in the city. The reason they were shut down is because a couple years earlier, there had been a heroin epidemic in Pittsburgh. It had started in the early 70s in New York and had finally crept over into Pittsburgh. Because Peter Saffer was an anesthesiologist by training, he turned to his paramedics and said, hey, look, heroin is just another opioid. I know how to reverse a heroin overdose in the same way that I know how to get someone out of anesthesia. It's a little known drug called Narcan. So the Freedom House paramedics are the first people in the world to use Narcan to reverse a heroin overdose. They do it. there just so happens to be a reporter from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette who's following them around when they reverse this overdose. She writes this incredible article about this work that they did on a dark night in a back alley, and people in the city reading this article have two responses. One, this is amazing, and two, why them? The rest of the city does not have this. The rest of the city, if any other neighborhood has an overdose, that young man, that young woman, they die right where they fell. But in Pittsburgh, in the Hill, the poorest and most downtrodden and overlooked neighborhood in the entire city, they're being saved. And they become victims of their own success. People see, well, wait a minute, this incredible thing that's happening, but it's happening there and it's happening to them and it's not happening to me. Why? And they get very angry and they turn to the mayor, who for years has been trying to stop Freedom House from growing, and he has to explain why. So finally he says, okay, we'll start a citywide program. But he doesn't use Peter Saffer, who invented CPR, who invented paramedics, who has been successfully running a paramedic program in his city now for 8 years. He gets new doctors and they recruit all new people, none of whom have any experience whatsoever on an ambulance. And he starts his own program. And it's perhaps not a coincidence that the paramedics that they roll out look nothing like the paramedics from Freedom House.
So Freedom House starts, and the white folks wanted nothing to do with them. But then in 75, when they start saving the lives of black people with heroin overdoses, then the white folks like, yo, hey, what about us? And then the mayor, obviously pissed off and jealous of this unit, says, fine, we'll go ahead and do this, but let's screw the most experienced people. Let's not listen to them, talk to them, hear from them. We'll just take it from here.
Yes, the people quite literally selected as the national standard by the President of the United States were not chosen to continue and expand EMS in their own city. So the world's first paramedics.
So what happened to, were they all men? Were there any black women who were part of this?
There were. So initially, I mean, they started in 1960. So, there was certainly some chauvinism involved in the beginning. And women were hired as dispatchers, but several of the women were watching what was going on and saying, well, hold on a second. I think I can do that. And one in particular by the name of Darnella Wilson was very young, and she's working as a dispatcher, and she sees what's happening. And one of the guys who ran the program by the name of Walt Brown, he just saw something in Darnella, and he said to her one night, if you're interested in what's going on, get your butt on an ambulance and I'll show you. And so he takes her out, and her mind is blown. And she immediately says, I want to do this. So she begins training. She would go on to become a lifelong paramedic, a lifelong nurse, but it started there. So there were, there were some women who were involved in the program.
What happened to these men? Obviously, the city didn't bring them into their program. So what happened to them?
So perhaps not surprisingly, the city's program immediately belly flops. They brought in doctors who didn't know what they were doing. They brought in brand new paramedics who didn't know what they were doing. They tried to expand it and they didn't have enough money. Nothing was ready. And so the program begins to fail. So they turned to Nancy Caroline, who again would write the textbook that the entire world would learn how to be a paramedic on. And they said, okay, look, we'll hire you. So they wanted to bring her over to the city. And she said, yeah, I will absolutely come to the city. You bring all of my people. So she wrote out this list of demands. And most of them, honestly, all of them were really simple demands. Hire my people who want to be hired, keep them in their current shifts, let them practice at their current level. And the sort of the one thing that they really wanted more than anything, it was the final item on the list, was publicly recognize Freedom House for the service it's provided this city for the last 7 years. So, and I pulled it out of her papers in Harvard. You can see her letter to the mayor, and you can see the mayor's response. He reluctantly agrees to all of the demands except the last one, the only one that was free, which was a public recognition of the people who started it all. That is not on his list of things that he'll do. So the city hires as many of the Freedom House medics as want to go over. They're required to do that, but they're not required to keep them. So over the course of the next year, they essentially make life so miserable for them that the vast majority of the people who go over quit. Darnella Wilson was not even allowed to operate as a paramedic. They put her in the jail where she had to supervise prisoners. She had no experience with that whatsoever. She was very young. She was 18, 19 years old. It was a traumatic experience for her, but she was angry enough that she held on. Some of the medics who stayed remained with the city of Pittsburgh through their careers. One by the name of John Moon retired as the assistant chief, but before he left, he hired a woman by the name of Amara Gilchrist, who would go on to become the first female chief of Pittsburgh EMS and the first black chief of Pittsburgh EMS.
The thing that is just incredulous, they have the experience, they have the knowledge, they have the success, and you were so spiteful, you were so racist that you would rather hire people to run a program who have no idea what they're doing, who are all white, because you do not want to use those black people.
Yeah. I mean, there's literally there's no way to look at it in any other way. From the city's reluctance through the 1970s, there's no way to justify it because it doesn't happen in any other city, large or small, through its closing. It would be one thing if you could point to Freedom House and say, well, yes, they were the first, but they didn't keep up and the world has passed them by. And so this needs to be advanced. Clearly not the case because they were selected by the U.S. president to serve as a national standard. Their physician would go on to create the exact same program in other countries. These were people who had been on an ambulance for 7 years, had been responding to calls, were incredibly well experienced, and were from the neighborhood, who knew the city. Many of the people that they brought in were not from Pittsburgh. They were from outlying areas. So they were bringing in inexperienced people who didn't know anything, who were terrified, and who needed to have their hands held. I mean, there's this incredible story of John Moon, one of the first medics. He sticks it out. He gets on with the city. He's placed as a third man on an ambulance, which is a 2-man crew by any measure. He's told, don't talk to anybody, don't touch anybody, you just carry our bag. This by 2 people with no experience, who had less training than he did. And he sits there and he's holding their bag. He's literally holding their bag until they get a critical call. They walk in on a man who is in cardiac arrest. These 2 brand new medics with no experience, who are technically now his superiors, who don't let him touch or talk to patients, turn to him in a panic and say, do something. And John in that moment realizes his power. I am well trained, I am experienced, I know what's going on. And he basically tells these guys, sit down and shut up. He gives them pointers, you do this, you do that. He runs the code. They get this person back, they get to the hospital, having saved this life, and he turns to them and he says, from now on, things are different and I'm in charge. But that shows you, the fact that he had to go through that shows you how ridiculous how ridiculous the whole thing is. I mean, there's no other way to explain why they were treated the way they were treated.
But it's America. It shows you exactly who America is. It shows you exactly how people feel about this, and how the work of African Americans has been grossly underappreciated in this country. Are any of these individuals still alive?
Yeah, there's about a half dozen. And when I began working on this program or this project, this story had been dormant for decades. All of this happened before I was born. I think largely they were resigned to the fact that nobody was going to know. And, over the last couple of years, people have started to pay attention. People have responded. Just last year, the mayor read a proclamation in which he publicly thanked them. The thing that they requested in 1975 that nobody had done, he did it. They were several of them were invited to Congress for the State of the Union with President Biden. They have been given honorary degrees at universities. So people are now reaching out to them. People are recognizing them. Their contribution is being recognized. The EMS community as a whole did not know this existed. If you talk to people and you said, how did this all begin? They would have said, well, in Los Angeles or in Miami and Seattle, there were all these different little programs that began. And there was this TV show called Emergency that everybody saw and loved. And it created a generation of kids who wanted to grow up to be paramedics. None of them knew this. And the EMS community, the medical community, is really embracing their story. So yeah, there are some of them who are still alive, but many, who died before they had the chance to get recognition. There was one woman I spoke to who said, my husband died without his kids really knowing what he had done. And it's tragic to hear somebody say that, and all you can do is say, well, I'll do everything I can to help carry the torch for you.
Indeed. I got to ask this here. Have they gotten the recognition from Black organizations? Has, the NAACP nationally ever recognized Freedom House and these brothers? Black medical organizations.
I don't know specifically about that. I know that, a lot of medical organizations have recognized them. But if has that happened? Has the NAACP done something? I don't know specifically that has happened. I think there are organizations locally in Pittsburgh that Hill House Foundation being one that has recognized them. But have they gotten their due on a national level? I don't think that's yet the case.
Amazing. It's just amazing again to hear this story, these unsung heroes. Has Pittsburgh, forget what that mayor did, has the city ever corrected that error and acknowledged these? Is there a monument? Is there a statue? Is there a plaque? Anything in Pittsburgh?
So the original Freedom House building has been saved because the Hill District is a historic area. And there's a plaque there. There's a plaque at Presbyterian University Hospital, which now has a different name, but it's now UPMC. At times there have been medallions placed on the ambulances, but as new ambulances came in, the medallions weren't always placed on the new ones. The new chief of EMS, as I said, she was an acolyte of John Moon. She has done as much as she can, and she's worked tirelessly to get this story out and to get it, so that it can be recognized. You mentioned Pitt earlier. Many of the physicians who are advisors and consultants on that show know the Freedom House people. They do what they can to help them out. They bring them to conferences. They have them speak to medical students. So the medical community in Pittsburgh, the Heinz Museum has set up there's a portion now in the medical part of the Heinz Museum that talks about Freedom House. So, the city is waking up to it. But, the first time I went there, I would talk to cab drivers or people in restaurants who say, oh, what are you doing in town? And I would explain it. And I would just get back blank stares. People hadn't heard of it, which I think was quite frustrating for everyone involved. But that is changing.
Well, absolutely. It's just the fact that these young brothers stepped up to become America's first paramedics, set the standard for the rest of the nation. And the nation not recognize them and honor them, to me, is an absolute travesty. But you do with this book. I have to ask this question. I ask this of every book author. What was your wow moment? What was your wow moment as you were researching, as you were interviewing, where there's something someone said or you discovered that caused you to go, wow, this is crazy?
I mean, there are so many moments like that. There's a guy by the name of, I keep mentioning John Moon. He's believed to be the first person to intubate somebody outside of the hospital. And, he had just been trained how to do it. And he gets told by his medical director, go ahead and do this. They get it. He does it. He's terrified. Intubating someone is a very difficult thing to do. But he's able to calm his nerves. He gets him to the hospital. He arrives. When you arrive at a hospital with a cardiac arrest, it is very much, it is totally chaotic. There are doctors, there are nurses, there are techs, there are people who are trying to gain insurance information. There's all kinds of, it's noise, it's hectic, there's life on the line, there's CPR that's happening, you're trying to change hands, there's the beeping, and there's the yelling of orders and medicine being given. It's very, very chaotic. So they come in, they enter into this world, which, immediately all this noise and chaos starts up, and the doctor who's standing there just points a finger across the room and goes, "What is that?" And everybody freezes. And what he's pointing at is this ET tube that is sticking out of the patient's mouth. And John's partner, George McCary, is sitting there squeezing the ventilation bag, breathing for this person. And the doctor says, "What is that?" And the room suddenly gets incredibly quiet. And John says, "That's an ET tube." And the doctor says, "Who told you to intubate him?" Or who intubated that person? And he said, "I did." And the doctor says, "And who are you?" And in this great moment, John could have been angry, he could have been cowed, he could have been anything. But in this great moment, he sort of stands up and he goes, "My name's John Moon, and I'm a Freedom House paramedic." And that is one of those mic drop moments that just you don't get a chance to do or to see very often. That was this incredible, you've got to be kidding me. But there's a litany of things that these guys did first that the rest of the world immediately took on to, whether it's the design of the ambulance, what's inside the ambulance, how a paramedic is trained, the use of Narcan, the fact that the president names them the national standard months before the mayor shuts them down, the fact that Israel's EMS program is designed after them, programs all over the world are designed after them. It is incredible what these guys did in just 7 years. And they were largely a bunch of young kids, high school graduates, fathers, sons, friends, guys who didn't even realize at the time what they were doing in terms of how much they were changing the world. But they were. Every day when they showed up, they were notching a new first. And to see all the things they went through, how poorly they were treated, and the grace with which they did it, every time it blows my mind.
That is incredible. I always love the scene from the Cotton Club where this racist guy is jamming up Lawrence Fishburne, who's backstage talking to one of the dancers. And then Fishburne turns to him and says, "Who are you and what are you doing talking to me?" I always love that quote. It just, when you were describing that's what it reminds me. Who are you? And basically, I don't need to explain to you who I am. Here's my name. Here's who I'm with. And most importantly, I'm saving this man's life.
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol, we've seen shutdown.
We're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear. Were there any, you mentioned Narcan, were there any other breakthroughs or historic things, never done before things that they created that still is the standard today?
Oh yeah. So if you get into the back of an ambulance, the way that the stretcher is laid out, there's a seat directly behind the patient's head, and immediately to the right of the seat is a suction unit. That is so that a paramedic can manipulate and have access to the patient's airway, which is something that was important to Saffer. And so he brings that in and tests it out with the paramedics and learns, oh, okay, these guys can do this. They can intubate. They can manage an airway. That becomes natural. If you walk into any ambulance now, that's exactly the way it looks. And the way that the training went, because Saffer was a physician, he looked at it as a truncated version of medical school. And he said, what we're going to do is you're going to get all the book learning, and then I'm going to take you out into the world. You're going to go to the ER, the OR, the ICU. You're going to go to the morgue. And then you're going to ride on other ambulances just so you can get an idea of what this stuff that you've learned looks like in practice. That's done in every paramedic program around the world today. The idea of a medical director. Saffer begins this program and it hits him immediately. Medicine changes every day. You need somebody involved. You need a physician there to have the guys come back in from a call and say, hey, this worked, or this did not work, or, I think this other thing might actually work if we change what we're doing and try this instead. And so you need a physician to kind of bounce those ideas around and turn those into law. Nobody was doing that until Freedom House. And so everything there's nothing that they touch from the radio dispatch on down. There's nothing that they touch that doesn't become national standard.
Absolutely unbelievable. A fascinating story. The book is American Sirens, the incredible story of the Black men who became America's first paramedics. Kevin Hazard, outstanding. And I'm sure that a lot of people will learn so much about, again, this missing and untold piece of American history, which is, of course, Black history is American history. Kevin, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Folks, an incredible conversation there with Kevin. Be sure to get his book, American Sirens. And I hope y'all appreciated the conversation with Kevin as well as Ellie Mistel. This is why we do Roland Martin Unfiltered in the Black Star Network, bringing you deep, thoughtful conversations you're not going to get anywhere else. All right, folks. Now, listen, lots going on. So do this here. We're done with the show, but don't forget, support the work that we do. Join our Bring the Funk fan club. Your dollars are critically important to the work that we do. If you want to contribute via Cash App, use the Stripe QR code. You see it right here on the screen. Click the Cash App Pay button to contribute. You can also use this for credit card as well. Checks and money order. Make them payable to Roland Martin Unfiltered. Mail them to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. PayPal is rmartin unfiltered, Venmo RM unfiltered, Zelle, Roland at RolandSMartin.com, Roland at RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Download the Black Star Network app, Apple phone, Android phone, Apple TV, Android TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Xbox One, Samsung Smart TV. Also, of course, be sure to get a copy of my book, White Fear, How the Browning of America is Making White Folks Lose Their Minds, available at bookstores nationwide. Get the audio version I read on Audible. Also, if you want to get our Roland Martin Unfiltered Black Star Network swag, go to shopblackstarnetwork.com. T-shirts, hoodies, mugs, and more. Get our Don't Blame Me, I Voted for the Black Woman shirt, as well as FAFO Project 2025. Get that shirt as well. And, of course, folks, listen, tomorrow I'm going to be in Chicago at the Black Women's Expo. I'm going to be moderating a panel at noon. So if you're in Chicago, come to McCormick Place. Look forward to a fantastic conversation. And I can't wait to return to the Windy City. And don't forget, folks, if y'all want to support our Black-owned businesses and various products, go to shopblackstarnetwork.com. Lots of different products that you can get there. Again, toilet paper, puzzles, all sorts of stuff. And again, support our Black-owned businesses, shopblackstarnetwork.com. And don't forget, download the app Fanbase if you want to also invest. Get more information at startengine.com/fanbase. Folks, that's it. I hope y'all have a fantastic show. I'll see y'all Monday right here. Roland Martin Unfiltered on the Black Star.